Imagine the U.S. sending a delegation to negotiate with ISIS. That's essentially the equivalent of what happened in Cairo yesterday. We heard that there was a rebuke, that Prime Minister Netanyahu rebuked Jared Kushner for actually meeting with senior Hamas terrorists. Prime Minister Netanyahu wants the Israeli people and the world to know that he's not really on board with these diplomatic meetings. Why isn't he saying it in his own voice? Because he doesn't want a crisis with Trump. Welcome to this MirYam Institute briefing. And what I want to talk to you about today is, first of all, the situation in the Gaza Strip, where we have a mix of both military developments and diplomatic developments. And really what we've had here is basically a tear, unfortunately, between Jerusalem and Washington over how best to proceed regarding the future of the Gaza Strip. President Trump's special envoy, Jared Kushner, is here in Jerusalem. Yesterday, he was in Cairo, where he met with senior Hamas terrorists. And according to multiple media reports, during that meeting, which is, in my view, deeply problematic, and I'll explain why in just a second, during that meeting in Cairo, Jared Kushner, first he stipulated what America's demands were for Hamas disarmament, for the future reconstruction of Gaza. He laid down a number of conditions, received assurances from senior Hamas members, basically senior terrorists. Imagine the U.S. sending a delegation to negotiate with ISIS. That's essentially the equivalent of what happened in Cairo yesterday. People like Khalil al-Khaya and other senior terrorists negotiating with the representatives of the U.S. president. So a very surreal scene. And during this meeting, Kushner and his aides are laying down the conditions for disarmament, for the future of the Gaza Strip, and passing on messages from Trump and trying to also pass along Israel's position to Hamas for what Israel is demanding that Hamas does. Although, believe me when I tell you that Hamas knows exactly what Israel is demanding of it. And in my view, and it's not just my view, Hamas has no intention whatsoever of actually complying with those demands. So before we get into what each side is trying to get out of this, let me take you along to today, where Kushner and his team arrive in Jerusalem and hold a lengthy meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and senior Israeli political and security officials. Reportedly, this meeting has been going on for over 4 hours. We've had sources tell multiple reporters and analysts here in Israel that during this meeting, first of all, Israel made it clear what it expects before anything can move into what they call stage 2 in the Gaza Strip. Stage 1 was the end of the hostage deals. And on top of that, we heard that there was a rebuke, that Prime Minister Netanyahu rebuked Jared Kushner for actually meeting with senior Hamas terrorists. And according to an Axios report, during that meeting, Kushner even thanked Hamas leaders for their cooperation in stage 1 during the hostage deals, which, if it is true, is really quite a shocking detail in my view. I can't imagine how the architects of the worst massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust are going to be receiving a thank you, a courtesy thank you from an official representative of the United States. I think that if we've reached that stage, we have some serious problems here. So look, I think the reason that we're hearing these leaks, first of all, is because Prime Minister Netanyahu wants the Israeli people and the world to know that he's not really on board with these diplomatic meetings, and that he has serious problems with the fact that Kushner even met with Hamas. Why isn't he saying it in his own voice? Because he doesn't want a crisis with Trump. Right now, Netanyahu is trying to avoid a head-on diplomatic collision with Trump. There are diplomatic tensions over the future of Gaza, over the future of Iran, and possibly over the future of Lebanon. I'll talk a little bit about Lebanon as well a little later in this video. So I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu right now is allowing these sources to speak to the Israeli media and to make it clear to the Israeli people and to the international community that Israel has deep misgivings about this entire process. So let me weigh in now myself, just to give you a little bit more clarity. What we had, if you remember, during the Gaza ceasefire, we had this 20-point Trump plan, which talked about a cessation, a temporary or prolonged cessation of the war, and then a series of steps after the hostage deal, which would involve basically freezing the current front lines. You've all heard of the yellow line. This is the part of Gaza that the IDF controls. This is now something between 65, some say even 70% of the Gaza Strip under IDF operational control. And the yellow line, the other side, the eastern side of the yellow line, is where Hamas controls, and that's where most of the 2 million Gazans currently reside. Hamas is terrorizing its own population. We had an update from the IDF a few days ago that not only has Hamas been using mosques, schools, hospitals, and UN facilities to try and rebuild its military terrorist capabilities, that they've been doing for years, and anybody who knows anything about Gaza knows that this is Hamas's modus operandi. But also, they've been using exactly those same facilities to interrogate and terrorize and torture Gazan civilians. We had an official report from the IDF about this, that not only are political opponents in Gaza being kidnapped and tortured, and they are political opponents to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. We know that. We know that there are militias also that are cooperating with Israel. We don't know how representative they are. It's a separate question. It's a separate video, but they're there. So in addition to that, according to IDF intelligence, random Gazan civilians are being called into these centers to be tortured. And this is how Hamas tries to deter its own population, that and obviously extrajudicial killings in which they're blindfolded in the streets and they get shot by a firing squad in the head. This used to be publicized until probably Turkey and Qatar advised Hamas to stop doing this in front of video cameras in order to terrorize its own population and to make them think 10 times before they cooperate with Israel or anybody else that could undermine their rule. So this is what's happening on the Hamas side of the yellow line. And in addition, we have routine violations of the ceasefire by Hamas, in which they send armed terrorists across the yellow line. They plant IEDs, they plant explosives, they sometimes open fire on IDF positions. Now, what's the IDF doing on its side of the yellow line? It's dismantling terrorist infrastructure, tunnels, still tunnels. Think about how long the IDF has controlled this area, and it's still finding tunnels. This gives you a glimpse into what was the most important priority for Hamas when it ruled Gaza, turning Gaza into a jihadist terrorist base from which to launch attacks that are ultimately designed to destroy the state of Israel. They hoped that Hezbollah and Iran would join their attacks simultaneously on October 7th, and they hoped that their holy war would lead to Israel's destruction. This is what Hamas is about. And so this is why so many people in Israel are saying, do you really think that an organization that is willing to burn Gaza to the ground, to bring disaster on the Gazan people, to commit the worst war crimes imaginable against the Israeli people is suddenly now going to disarm? Of course not. This is a ruse. This is an attempt to buy time for Hamas. Now, how are they doing this? In quite a sophisticated way, actually, and far too many people seem to be falling for it. What Hamas has told the International Board of Peace, this is the board that is supposed to handle the transition to stage 2 of the so-called ceasefire and the arrangements that everybody is talking about. What they have told the Board of Peace is that they are prepared to hand over their arms for storage so that these arms will be stored and given over to a future Palestinian government. What would that government be? Well, the first stage, according to this peace plan, is that there would be what they call a technocratic government, which is made up of sort of specialists in every area, like traffic and sewage, and people who know how to run public affairs. And there would be an international stabilization force, which is going to be commanded by a U.S. general by the name of Jesper Jeffers, if I pronounced that correctly. He was until recently the commander of Special Operations Command in U.S. Central Command. Is a very serious officer. He has been appointed to command the International Stabilization Force in Gaza. So you've got all these moving pieces, right? You've got the Board of Peace, which is supposed to oversee everything and negotiate with Hamas. You've got the International Stabilization Force, which is supposed to step in and start training a future Palestinian police force. you've got the technocratic government, and you've got Hamas saying, yeah, we'll hand over our weapons to this technocratic government. What's the problem? The whole thing is built on a myth. The whole thing is built on a fantasy, because as long as those weapons remain in Gaza in storage facilities, right? And I haven't even begun to discuss which weapons would be transferred, which wouldn't be. You can be sure that Hamas will know how to make a show of pretending to give its arsenal up when it will keep some of it. But let's put that aside for a second. Who is going to control this future Palestinian government? What happened in Gaza in 2007? Does anybody remember? In 2007, 2 years after Israel left the Gaza Strip, the what they call a disengagement, and it tore up every community and settlement that Israel built over the decades in Gaza, every soldier and every civilian torn out of the Gaza Strip. What happened? Within 2 years, the Palestinian Authority ran Gaza, and Hamas utilized its force to overthrow the Palestinian Authority. They call this the sort of Gazan civil war. They threw them from the rooftops. They killed them. They took over their weapons, and they ran the Gaza Strip and turned it into the terror base that we know today. Of course, this is what Hamas plans to do again. They will rule Gaza from the shadows. Who will be members of this Palestinian police? It will be Hamas. Who is going to tell this future Palestinian government what it can and cannot do? It will be Hamas. Who will put their hands on these storage facilities with the weapons in the future? It will be Hamas. This is the most obvious game plan. And they're agreeing to it because they want to buy themselves time. They understand that the IDF is encircling them. The IDF has a distinct advantage over them. And when their backs are against the wall, they turn to diplomacy to buy time. This is what jihadists do. And incredibly, there are those in the West who fall for it again and again and again. No matter how many times this playbook is utilized, people fall for it. Yes, Hamas will disarm. Really? Well, I tell you something. The day that Hamas agrees to have its weapons destroyed, not stored so that they can take them back over again, will be the day that pigs fly. So, what happened was that this Gaza Board of Peace, I don't know if you remember this, but approximately 10 days ago made a great announcement that they've reached a disarmament deal with Hamas. The weapons will be stored, and the IDF can start withdrawing. Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly said, guys, that's not going to happen. The weapons have to be destroyed. Now the Board of Peace is saying the weapons have to be destroyed because Israel insisted on it. Has Hamas agreed for the weapons to be destroyed? Nope, not officially. We haven't seen any of that happening. And again, they don't want to do it because once they really see their weapons destroyed, they're going to be powerless to continue their holy war. And they understand that that will be the end of them as a terror organization with very, very ambitious plans for this region. So they are trying to buy time, and they are using this diplomatic pressure to try and corner Israel. Now, I think that Israel also has got to do better when it comes to putting its own clear diplomatic vision forward. No stuttering, no hiding behind leaks to journalists. I think it's time that whatever government we have comes out and presents clear diplomatic options that serve the Israeli security and strategic interest for Gaza. So I think we need to have official documents from Israel saying the weapons need to be destroyed, and if they're not destroyed, the IDF will go in and destroy them. And we need timetables. By when will this happen? We need clarity. The Israeli people need clarity, and the international community need clarity. And I know that this is something that Benjamin has said time and again, and I think he's absolutely right about this, that if you leave a diplomatic vacuum open, somebody else is going to fill it. This is what we're seeing. So some of these plans that are being forced on us, these really flawed plans, it's really because our own government didn't put its own plans forward. I think that has to be said in the spirit of fairness. We have to be able to criticize, but also what we get wrong. And I think this is one of the things that we have gotten really wrong. We haven't put forward our own diplomatic agenda, and we're leaving a vacuum for others to fill, and it's costing us. It's costing us because we end up looking like we're just saying no. Now, the reason, again, that we're saying no to this is absolutely 100% valid. We have to say no, but we also have to put forward what we would agree to. And just to give you a hint about what I think our plan should be is stage one, either the weapons are destroyed, and if not, we will destroy them. No ifs or buts, no compromise. The end vision of this war should be Berlin 1945 throughout the whole of Gaza. In other words, the enemy either surrenders, which we know that they will not do, but we give them the option to surrender. We at least give them the option. And if not, we go in and finish taking the rest of the Gaza Strip, which is inherently possible for the IDF to do. This is the smallest arena, even though it's the most challenging urban warfare arena. I'm sure you've heard John Spencer and Benjamin talk to you about this again and again. By far and away the most challenging urban warfare arena on the planet. Difficult combat up ahead, but the IDF is the world leader now in tunnel warfare, in detection of this kind of threat, of the use of apartment buildings and hospitals and schools, closing what they call a sensor-to-shooter cycle in seconds. In other words, the time that it takes between detection of the target and bringing the direct, precise firepower on it and maneuvering into these areas. The IDF right now is the world leader in this because of the experience that it has built throughout years of combat since October 7th in both Gaza and in Lebanon. The IDF can do it. It's not easy, but it's inherently possible. So I think that the Israeli diplomatic agenda should say either the weapons are destroyed, all of them, every single weapon. The anti-tank missile launchers, which I'm sure I've told you in previous videos, are actually anti-home missile launchers. We saw what Hamas did with those anti-tank missile fire. Most of it wasn't directed at tanks, but at destroying the homes of the Gaza envelope. It was a genocidal tool directed against civilians. And AK-47s. Those are not weapons that Hamas can keep. Those were used to massacre Israelis. Every weapon, the booby traps, the IEDs, nothing can remain. And the demilitarization part, this is the infrastructure that they build into the ground. All the maps have to be given, and Hamas has to show exactly where all of its tunnels are. Otherwise, the IDF will have to do it. Those should be the only two options. And then after that, I think it's fair to look at the idea of an administration. Once that's complete, it becomes realistic to talk about a localized Gaza autonomy, one that perhaps could have Emirati teachers and curricula teaching children about peace and de-radicalizing the population that has been basically indoctrinated into jihad and hatred and violence for over 2.5 decades. Again, Berlin, 1945. Yes, it's possible. The German people were denazified, and Gazans are going to have to be de-Hamasified. And we could do this with the help of some of our Gulf partners. In my view, this is just my view, that's the kind of day after that we need to look at and put forward on the table with clear timetables and promote our own diplomatic agenda. Otherwise, we're going to have to keep struggling and responding to others' diplomatic agendas. And, guess what? In this world, in this cynical world, countries put forward diplomatic agendas that serve their interests, or sometimes political interests. Every agenda is different. It's high time that Israel started putting its diplomatic agenda forward that serves its interests. And clearly, by the way, any fair reading will conclude that this would be the best thing for Gazans as well. So that essentially is where we are with the Gaza Strip. Now, we can't ignore the fact that we've got elections coming up in Israel. That's influencing everything. There are midterms coming up in the U.S. That's also very influential on the political decision-making. At the end of the day, these political echelons tell the militaries what to do. As a military analyst, I can't ignore these factors. They're certainly there. So I think that for the time being, the Gaza situation is essentially going to be frozen. Now, we have seen a decrease in Israeli firepower against terror targets because of pressure from the White House, but it hasn't stopped. So, there were reports that last week that every attack that the IDF wants to conduct against a threat now needs the Chief of Staff's approval. That means that there's a lot more centralized control. We're not talking about terrorists opening fire on the IDF. Of course, they'll be able to return fire immediately. That's already happened. But if a target is detected, it presents a future threat, perhaps in 2-3 days. That goes all the way up the chain of command. Those are the orders of the political echelon. because this has become very, very sensitive. Now, I really hope that that becomes a temporary situation and not a long-term one, because if it becomes a long-term one, we are going to start going backwards into the kinds of misconceptions that led us into this mess. I don't think that it's going to happen so quickly. I think that the trauma of October 7th is too deep, too deeply seared into the security establishment of this country to agree to pull our punches for a long time in Gaza. But what we're seeing now is a sort of, I would call it a walk through a diplomatic minefield, trying to balance diplomatic interests of Israel together with the military and strategic interests, and to try and keep Trump on side. So that is essentially what is happening in the Gaza Strip. We've had several strikes in recent days that are noteworthy. Terrorists who took part in October 7th have been eliminated from Hamas, from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, company and squad commanders, lots of tactical developments. But as I've said, that level of fire has been decreased. But Prime Minister Netanyahu did tell Kushner today that Israel reserves its right to continue with those strikes, and it has no intention of complying with the demand of Hamas, of course, to stop those strikes. So watch this space, but at the moment, I would consider the Gaza arena essentially frozen. And if things have moved to the diplomatic sphere, I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth before we get actual strategic changes in the Gaza arena. And the only real way that it's going to change, in my view, is for the IDF to finish the war in the Gaza Strip. Everything else is going to be basically a holding pattern and an attempt by Hamas to buy itself time. Let me quickly move on to the Lebanese arena. I want to talk to you about some very interesting developments that are occurring there. Now, here too in Lebanon, we're seeing the diplomatic arena become more dominant regarding the future of Lebanon. But here, I think that Israel's situation is a little bit easier. And I'll tell you why. We have basically two pilot zones. I'm sure you've heard me talk about this in recent weeks, in which the Lebanese armed forces have moved into these two pilot zones. One of them is located just outside the Israeli security zone, and the second is located just outside of the Israeli security zone. Sorry, one is outside and one is inside, but both of them are fairly distant from the Israeli border. And their job, the job of the Lebanese army, is to prove that they can disarm Hezbollah and demilitarize the area. As this is happening, Israelis and Lebanese and Americans have been meeting in Rome on and off to try and map out the next stages. They're talking about bringing in an international force. Again, this sort of magical recipe that's somehow going to help everything. And they're going to bring this force in to watch and monitor how the Lebanese army is disarming Hezbollah. Well, look, guess what? In those two security zones, in those two pilot zones, I haven't seen any evidence, literally nothing at all, that the Lebanese army has actually taken any concrete steps to disarm Hezbollah. I haven't seen them go into bunkers. I haven't seen them go into homes in a systematic manner. I haven't seen them confront Hezbollah. All I've seen is grand gestures and diplomatic statements and perhaps the occasional patrol. It seems to me that the Lebanese army so far is getting an F. It's failing in its attempt to prove that it can apply Lebanese state sovereignty. And this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And so Israel's position is easier here because Israel can very clearly say, look, until we see you, Lebanon, actually take steps to disarm Hezbollah, this pilot program stays where it is. There will be no further security zones that IDF is going to pull out of until you can actually prove that you can disarm them. I would also add, by the way, that there's no reason to wait for the pilot zones. The Lebanese army can also try and prove its ability to confront Hezbollah anywhere in Lebanon. How about Beirut, the capital? What about Dakhya? Nothing, no disarmament happening there either. And I'm sure those of you who've watched my previous videos know what the reason for that is. Half of the Lebanese army made up of Shiites. You know that Lebanon is deeply divided into sects. And the Shiite sect is the one that also produced Hezbollah and is the one that has essentially been taken over by Iran and the Islamic Revolution. And so these Lebanese Shiites don't want to fight their fellow Lebanese Shiites from the same villages who they know so well. They don't have the appetite to do it. And Hezbollah has infiltrated parts of this army, including the military intelligence part of it, which is very important for any military. So right now we don't even have the composition, the right composition to take on Hezbollah in the Lebanese army. And this should be no surprise that the Lebanese army is not succeeding so far in disarming Hezbollah. I think I said in the previous video that they're not going to succeed. Unfortunately, I'd love for them to succeed, but they don't. There's no evidence that they have the capability. And we have to keep remembering that word, capability. You know, when we talk about these grand diplomatic arrangements, the first question we all have to ask is, do the players have the ability to do what they say they're going to do? That's what it comes down to. That's the reality check. In Lebanon, so far and for the foreseeable future, the answer is no. That's why Defense Minister Israel Katz said, look, the IDF is going nowhere. It's going to stay in southern Lebanon for a long time. This statement was condemned, of course, by the Lebanese and by international actors that, they said Israel promised to withdraw. Israel said it would withdraw only if they see evidence of the Lebanese army doing what it said it could do. Zero evidence right now of that. None. Absolutely zero. So here I think Israel's situation diplomatically is a little easier. Now, we've also had a very dramatic development in an underground terrorist nerve center that Hezbollah and Iran spent years and a huge amount of wealth and money, treasure really, to build. It's called the Ali Taher Ridge. It's in the Nabatea area of southern Lebanon. It's overlooking the Beaufort, I guess you could call it a castle, which is another site that Hezbollah had taken over, and the IDF took it back over. So this Ali Taher Ridge has got a number of Hezbollah terrorists, some of them senior, holed up underground. They've been there for weeks. And Hezbollah has tried to use drones to get supplies to them. It's tried to enable them to escape. The IDF is not allowing it to do that. It's encircled the area. There are lots of things going on in this area. And a few days ago, we had a fiber optic first-person view drone attack by Hezbollah on members of the elite engineering Yahalom IDF unit in the area, causing serious injury to 2 soldiers and an officer. Now, that is a sign, I think, by Hezbollah. We can read that as saying that their terrorists under the Ali Taher Ridge complex are in distress and they want to try and get them out, or they want the IDF to stop closing in on this, because this is a very important nerve center. It enables them to overlook the whole the area. It's actually part of a Hezbollah territorial unit called the Badr unit. They've divided southern Lebanon into these territorial units. So Radwan is the elite Hezbollah unit that operates across all sectors, and it's actually the slated invasion force that Hezbollah had built to invade northern Israel, the Galilee region, and conduct an attack on an order of magnitude that would have been several times larger and worse than October 7th. That was the job of the Radwan force. And the territorial units inside Lebanon are supposed to repel IDF activities. So the Badr unit is controlling the Ali Taher underground ridge, very important strategic area, and Hezbollah is on the cusp of losing it, and that's why they launched this drone. Now, in response to this drone attack, the Israeli Air Force launched a series of quite devastating targeted attacks. They killed a senior Radwan unit commander. They killed a Badr unit battalion commander, several terrorists. One of the terrorists, these strikes were conducted in the Nabatea area. One of the terrorists from the Badr unit was in charge of frontline drone operation. This gives you a sense of just how precise the intelligence is. One of the terrorists was surrounded by his wife and children, using them as human shields. One of the most sick and cynical uses of human shields, and they do it on a regular basis. They do it in Gaza. They do it in Lebanon. This is the same doctrine that they learned from Iran. And so there were these airstrikes, and now things have calmed down again. But really, at the end of the day, I think that the Lebanese arena is also frozen. I think we can say it's also frozen. And the good news is that the IDF is there, 10 kilometers deep, providing vital security for the northern communities that are really now starting to flourish again. Just like in the Gaza envelope, the communities are starting to flourish. People are back in their homes. They're rebuilding. They see a future. Why? Because the IDF is on the other side. Because they cannot be defended from the border. Because no international force is going to do our security for us. And those are the hard truths. And so whatever you may hear during the various, election seasons coming up here in Israel, in the US, remember this: the security establishment of Israel today says that they have to be on the other side of the border for a very long time to make sure that the horrors of October 7th and also smaller attacks that I don't think we can afford to absorb. Imagine a smaller attack, God forbid, on one of these border communities. That could render it inhabitable. That people could say, that's it. I can't deal with this after October 7th. Another attack, another anti-tank missile attack on buses or vehicles or homes. We can't afford it. We have no more room for error. We can't gamble anymore. So I think that these are the lessons that are going to be applied. I hope that I've given you a reasonable breakdown of the situation. Haven't gotten to Iran, which obviously deserves its own separate podcast. Keep your wonderful feedback coming in, and I will catch you in the next episode. Thank you.